ProRevenge. Posted by user Dromio05. Dad gets fired for BS reasons, plays the long game, ends up in charge, takes the extended family on a cruise. My dad had worked at the same company for almost 30 years, before he was abruptly fired for complete bullshit. He was coordinating an upcoming meeting of people, who had to fly in from around the country. One important participant resigned unexpectedly, so Dad cancelled the meeting via email, and explained why. Apparently, that counted as improperly communicating privileged information, and he was fired the next day. All this happened a week after Dad's boss retired, and was replaced by a new guy who wanted to cut costs. What a coincidence. This was about 10 years ago, near the height of the recession. Dad was in his 50s, hadn't interviewed for a job since the early 1980s. He wasn't sure he'd ever find another job. My mom went back to work at a school to pay the bills, while Dad scraped together what he could, doing some shitty online consulting gigs for basically minimum wage. They managed to keep their heads above water, but only barely. Dad was out of work for a year and a half. He finally landed a job, at a new company 3 states away, coincidentally, about an hour away from where my wife and I lived, and were expecting Dad's first grandchild. Mom and Dad moved to live about 20 minutes away from us. They had paid off the mortgage on their house, so they decided to keep it and rent it out, planning to retire there in a few years. New company treated Dad very well. Better salary than he'd made at old company, good benefits, and respect from his coworkers and superiors. A year later, Mom and Dad were able to buy a second, smaller house near their grandkids. Dad mentioned a few things about his time at old company to his new bosses. Nothing confidential or anything, more like overall strengths and weaknesses. Of course, the story of how he got fired came out as well. It turns out that when you work at a company for over 25 years, you learn a thing or two about how it works, and cutting costs by firing experienced employees can make your company vulnerable. New companies started to get very interested. They saw an important business opportunity, and also a chance to get revenge on behalf of a valued employee. A couple of years later, new company bought old company. They were both big companies, and mergers of this size take time, but when the dust settled it was clear there were redundancies, divisions and products that both companies had, that new company only needed one of. They kept as many of old company's people as they could, and very few lost their jobs. Except, of course, for the people responsible for firing Dad. New company put Dad in charge of the building he used to work in at old company, and let him choose his employees from both old and new companies. Dad had to move back to the old state, so new company helped sell his house in the new state, and gave him a moving stipend of several $1,000s. But Mom and Dad were just moving back into their own house. They sold their new house that they'd made payments and improvements on, for 5 years for a nice profit. With that money plus the moving stipend, they paid off debts, saved for retirement, and took me, my siblings, our spouses, and the grandkids on a cruise. Edit, since people are asking, I never heard exactly what transpired when the guy who fired Dad got downsized. But, since it's Christmas, I'm actually able to just ask him. Dad wouldn't say. Exit interviews are supposed to stay private. I told him about this post, with all the names left out, and that people wanted to know. He just grinned and said, that would be improperly communicating privileged information. Posted by user Action. Try to fail me. See what it gets you. Okay, so in 9th grade, I had one of my favorite teachers of all time teaching biology. He was known for his extremely long and difficult packets, but everyone loved him anyway. He was one of those people who can make any assignment, or subject seem easy, because everyone was having far too much fun, to notice how much they were learning. His TA, however, was another story. She had this internal power struggle going on, 24/7, and she disliked me immediately when I first walked into class. We'll call her Ms. B anyway. I began to notice that Ms. B lost a much higher percentage of the assignments I turned in, than anyone else, except for a friend of mine who was also on her naughty list. I began writing the date on every assignment I did, having the teacher sign it, and scanning it into my computer. Ms. B knew nothing about this, and instead of just printing out my scan of an assignment when she lost it, I would just complete and turn it in again, once again getting it signed and scanned. Side note, Ms. B was also one of the lunchtime hall monitors, those people who go around and try to keep a couple of hundred middle schoolers in check at once. At least, that was what she was supposed to be doing. Instead, she completely ignored everyone else, and blatantly followed me around, systematically adding each and every one of my hiding spots to the not allowed list. Me being awkward and asocial, preferring to read books than be a normal person, and talk to people, anyway, the end of the year rolls around, and the final packet looms ahead. It's the biggest and most difficult of the lot. It also is worth around 40% of that term's grade. Being very wary of this TA's BS, I finished and turned it in, 2 weeks before it was due. Wouldn't you know, she lost it. This was repeated 7 times, I shit you not. True to my method, I redid it each time, and on the 7th time, the day the packet was actually due, I turned it in directly to the teacher, and asked him to input the score manually, which he was nice enough to do for me. My grade secure, I then went home, printed out a 6-inch pile of lost assignments, and brought them to the office the next day. I reported her, and when she was called down to the office to report, she was smug as hell, telling me to prove it then. Trouble, that was her nickname for me. Her face when I pulled this mound of paper out of my backpack was the most priceless and satisfying thing I had ever seen. The grades were locked by then, so I was off the hook, and she was nearly fired, eventually being reinstated but under close inspection. Last week I revisited the school, where she's apparently still working. It's what sparked this memory, and I tried not to laugh when I walked into the biology room to catch up with the teacher, watching her face literally turn purple with rage, from the corner of the room. Posted by user, Horatius Cockleys. I got fired and went after the boss's money, his hotel, and his marriage. Back when I still was in university, I used to work for a hotel to make ends meet. When I started, the hotel very urgently needed new personnel. So I cut a deal with the old owner about getting to choose and pick shifts, so I could visit my courses and exams. Speaking some extra foreign languages, I also got a little bonus each month on top. The old owner was a great guy. He owned multiple hotels, so I rarely saw him. But when he was in the house, he always made a point to have drinks with the staff, chat with us, and if we were free he even invited those of the front desk to fancy restaurants who were not on shift. Fast forward. I had worked in the hotel for a few years now, and was nearing the completion of my studies. So it wouldn't have been an eternity until I had to quit anyway. As I was of course more interested to work in my field of study. As part of my deal with the old owner, I mostly chose to work night shifts, allowing me to visit my courses at university during the day. To make up for my privileges, I had picked up the habit of doing some extra work in the dead of night. Other shifts would normally have to do, when I in contrast could have sat around and stared at the walls. People were grateful for the help in the beginning, and we became a rather tight-knit group. But over time people rotated in and out. When the old owner retired, and his asshole of a son took over the business, as the new owner, I already feared the worst. The new owner didn't like me very much. I never found out the exact reason for that one. I was at that point nearly the sole veteran left from when I started. Among the tasks I had taken on, was doing light clerical tasks to ease the manager's job in the morning. For that, I generally had to use the manager's network account. One night while doing my lists, I logged into the manager's account and emailed to do my job. Then I saw an email with my name in the subject line. I know it is not nice to snoop, but of course, I read it. Turns out the new owner wanted to get rid of me. I still had my old employee contract with the bonuses for foreign language abilities, and was allowed by my contract to pick and choose shifts. I can only assume these privileges are what made the new owner hate me. No idea if he had other reasons. because to be honest these seem very weak to me. But he couldn't fire me without cause. On top of that, I would be owed severance if fired. And generally, there were not enough bodies in the shift rotation without me. Though the new owner didn't seem to understand that point, as the emails told me. I looked for more emails concerning me and found them. There was an email chain between some of the employees, the manager and the new owner. I was of course not included, as I was the hated topic. The employees didn't like me hogging the night shifts. Because those paid better, and for every night you worked you got paid the night bonus. The manager was the only one rather neutral on the matter, and just curbed their enthusiasm to get rid of me, as they needed me to be fully staffed. The new owner, and my colleagues actively conspired to make a hostile work environment, so I would quit of my own volition. I was furious. I thought about a variety of reactions. From egging their cars to burning down the hotel. But I settled on a less crazy method of revenge. I called my uncle at 2 a.m. asking for advice. My uncle is a lawyer. So for sake of proof, I forwarded myself all the emails. I made photos, printed them out, made copies and filmed the whole deal just to be sure. My uncle told me to sit tight, and see if things got worse, or if it was just bluster. And so I gave it a few days. And things did take a turn. Snide remarks about my looks, clothing and so on were only the tip of the iceberg. Some of the colleagues were just as professional as before. But the conspirators always left extra work for me, or pawned off shit duties they normally had to do on me. I always kept a spare shirt and suit at work, just to have a change, which suddenly disappeared. One guy even started to threaten me with violence. But I kept clenching my butt cheeks. I would not give them the satisfaction of saving on the severance or giving in. I am a big boy after all. I did, however, stop doing any extra work I was not obligated to do. Which in the end was the reason they used to fire me. They still had to pay me severance. The next day my uncle, with bundled proof of the email, and all documented harassment by my colleagues, served the hotel my lawsuit. It started with wrongful termination and ended with harassment. Reportedly the manager went white as a sheet, when he realized where the emails must have come from. The new owner had been on vacation, and had to cancel his expensive vacation in France, to deal with this. Their counsel advised them to settle. So I accepted my severance and a hefty bonus on top. Enough money to last me until the end of university without work. But that was not all my revenge. I had gone after the new owner's money. But in the next step, I went after the hotel. I had used all the spare time during night shifts alone, to document every last violation of city, county, district, state and federal law I could find. That went from minor things, like some harmless mold under the kitchen sink, to substantial violations like modifications to the building. The building was under a limited form of historical protection, by federal law, on the ground of being built, and inhabited by somewhat important historical figures a few hundred years back. So every renovation, or change in floor plans needs to be signed off on by a committee. Which can take ages. There is also a grant paid to the new owner, by the government for keeping the building intact as is. So with my uncle's help, I sent documentation of every violation I could find, to the corresponding agency. In 1 month everything from health, building code, fire safety, to the finance and work police, crawled over the hotel. In the end, it was the building and fire inspectors, that shut the place down. The new owner had done substantial renovations to the top floor luxury apartments, which he used when he was in town. So the new owner had to pay back the grant, pay fines for unauthorized alterations to the building, endangering his guests, because something wasn't built right according to fire code, and had to close down shop until the building was fixed. I also tipped off a friend who had studied journalism, and worked at a local paper. The paper ran an article on all the violations accumulated. Which tanked the business, once it had reopened, as the newspaper article had led to horrible reviews. In the end, to afford all the fines, repayments and building cost, the new owner sold the hotel. As the cherry on top, all the assholes who had tried to harass me, lost their job. Granted, the people who didn't do anything to me, lost their jobs too. But didn't do anything to stand up for me or help me either. So I don't feel too much remorse. And the revenge cherry on top was, that the new owner, whenever he was in town, used to bring home escorts. Which in my country is not illegal. But he was married. It took some doing, to get that information to the new owner's wife. But one of my former colleagues, who had quit before this had all happened, had her email. So I let her know what the new owner was up to, when he was out of town. I don't know what exactly happened, but they did divorce in the end. Make of that what you will. TLDR, new boss dislikes me. I wait until I get fired, to sue him for encouraging other employees, to make my life miserable, so I'd quit. I take my severance and a hefty settlement. Then I send proof and a list of violations that the hotel is not up to code, according to agencies. The hotel gets shut down. To pay for fines, and to get it back up to code, hotel needs to be sold. Asshole colleagues lose their jobs. Lastly, I know boss cheated on his wife with escorts, which I let the wife know. The marriage blew up. If you liked these stories, hit that like button, and leave a comment below. You can upvote these stories by pressing the links in the description. If you want to hear more stories from me, hit the subscribe button, and press the bell icon to be alerted when a new video is posted.